Other than I need to probably get a bio from her next time because I forgot to ask her for that. So I will say that. But Rachel is new to our Toastmaster Club a few months in. She's been a very valuable asset to our club. I enjoy her enthusiasm as far as what she has with the club. Also participated in our the area contest that we had about a few weeks ago. So at this time, please welcome Rachel Nead.
Fellow Toastmasters guests this evening. Toga, 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 toga. Alright, you might have heard that from Animal House, very famous quotes. And we might think about these togas and think, wow, that represents Greek week at schools. So we have a different perspective of what the toga is. We need to go back to ancient Greek and Rome and think about those who came before us who wore that togas and what they represent. I wanted to focus tonight on Aristotle because he does contribute a lot to our field in communication and being able to go about and speaking and being an effective presenter. Aristotle was born in 384 before the Common Era, and he was born to a prestigious family in northern Greece. His father was a physician and at the time was taking care of Alexander the Great's great-grandfather. His father initially wanted him to go into the field of medicine because he wanted to have his son go about in that industry, follow in his father's footsteps. Unfortunately, at the age of 10, Aristotle became an orphan and he was sent to live with his uncle. His uncle preferred an education in humanities, and as such, he ended up sending him off to Plato's school, the Academy. Historians claim that it was at the time of the Academy that Aristotle really established who he was. He ended up developing a lot of his philosophical thoughts, and he also had that, if you look at the philosophy differences between Aristotle and Plato, you'll see that there are big differences, but you can also see that Plato did contribute a lot to Aristotle. Aristotle remained with the Academy until 347 before the Common Era, which is when Plato passed. After his death, he traveled a little bit, he got married, and then around in 343 before the Common Era, he became the tutor to that then Macedonian king who happened to be Alexander, later become Alexander the Great. After tutoring Alexander, he ended up going home, visiting there. Unfortunately, his wife passed, and he later traveled back to Athens. At that point, he launched what was the Lyceum, and the Lyceum became a lot of school of thought for the students there. And it's during those times at the Lyceum that a lot of people believe that he came up with a lot of his current philosophies that we use today. Unfortunately, what we have today is just a bare minimum of what was actually what he taught. A lot of it disappeared, and even interesting enough, we might read the book on rhetoric, Aristotle. A lot of this is not necessarily what Aristotle himself wrote, but comes from the notes of his students. When Alexander the Great passed, Aristotle became a person that was charged with treason, and he didn't want to follow in the case of Socrates, so he ended up fleeing, and a year later he ended up passing due to a stomach ailment. So I just wanted to give you a broad overview of who Aristotle was before I go into some of his theoretical concepts, which is something that we know about today. The Aristotelian theory is fairly popular. It's something that if you take a speech class, you might hear about it. If you take a philosophy class, you might hear about it. So it's pretty common. And in fact, I had this kind of conversation with Mike a while back and others who were in the elevator, and that's part of why I decided to give this presentation today. Aristotle believed that persuasion was an art form. It's the counterpart to dialectic, which means that it isn't that it's an opposition to having those discussions, but you need to have both rhetoric as well as dialect in order to be an effective communicator, in order to go about an enriching society. Unfortunately, the speaker does need to bring to the table what they previously know. So they need to have some sort of experience, and they need to know what kind of what he says means is available. So what abilities do they have? Some people are good at naturally telling certain stories, and others are more persuasion. I wanted to talk specifically about his rhetorical proofs, which he does initially talk about, and what we hear about mostly, which is ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos goes back to the speaker's credibility, the trust you have within that speaker. It's, how I remember, is often ethical. It is what is ethical. I went ahead and Alexander Dumas tied in a lot of Aristotelian thoughts in his Three Musketeers, and Athos, the leader of the Musketeers, represents the ethical leader. Think about if you've ever seen the movie or read the book, that person, he has a dilemma. His former wife, she was a traitor, he has an ethical dilemma he's going throughout the story. After ethos, you have pathos, and pathos is the emotions. It's the type of feeling that is aroused in the audience by the speaker. Porthos represents that. And if you remember, or ever saw the movie or read the book, you'll notice he was the emotional person. He was a very emotional type person. He would be the one first up to battle and first to fight. Finally, you have logos. And I have here, just because you know I like Alice in Wonderland, the Cheshire Cat. And that's because Lewis Carroll uses a lot of riddle and syllogisms. And when you go about in your logic, you can have inductive reasoning, you can have deductive. And if you ever read the book, you'll notice that that's throughout the entire book. Logos, interestingly enough, is not something like Logos or something. It's Aramis, who was played by Charlie Sheen. Kind of ironic there for a moment. But he was the one that was logical in the group. Well, I do want to say thank you very much. And I hope you've learned a lot today about Aristotle and his various principles. If you have any questions, please feel free to talk to me afterwards.